Bob, for joining us here tonight. I'm very proud to have the three past presidents of Maccabi USA here with us. The three of you have a lot in common. None of you were Maccabi athletes prior to becoming president. All of you have held extremely high positions in Maccabi World Union. Bob as honorary president, Toni and Ron as 2 times elected, 8-year serving vice presidents of Maccabi World Union. And each of you has received the highest honor in the Maccabi movement, the Akhir Maccabi Award, which is given for outstanding leadership at the international level to a maximum of 12 people every 4 years. And all of you were invited to my kids' bar and bar mitzvot like 20 years ago. So although Maccabi USA was born in 1948 and was then known as United States Committee Sports for Israel, and has had a very rich history prior to Bob becoming president in 1981. Tonight, we're going to focus on the post-Bob era and for the last 36 years that you guys led the organization. And before we start, a little good and welfare. Happy birthday to Maccabi World Union Vice President Jordan Weinstein and immediate past president of Maccabi World Union, Leo Danbensky. And a shout out to my good friend Roy Solomon, honorary vice president of Maccabi World Union. So usually when I host these events, I'm a little bit nervous because you never know if the panelists are going to have one-word answers. Tonight is one of those nights where I'm not concerned at all about how everyone's going to answer because I know everyone here is very comfortable speaking. So I'd like to start with how and why did you get involved with Maccabi USA? And let's go in chronological order. We'll start with Bob.
Well, my introduction to the organization actually began in 1977. I was asked by an associate of mine, a business associate, to be involved in the program to raise some funds for the athletes that were going over for the 1977 games. And at that time, I met Billy Stearman, and Harold Lannisberg was the one who was taking me over, really designed to put me in touch with the Israel Tennis Center's program. And I went to Maccabi, and I was quite impressed with the program. It was an incredible program. I saw a lot of opportunity within the program to build it and to grow it in a different direction, and wanted to get more involved. So from 77 to 81, I worked. I went to Israel for New York for the meetings. I worked with Billy Stearman, and I did the Pan Am Games in 79, which really turned me on and realized that I would like to make a future with this organization and where it could go, and saw some great ideas about adding some different programs that would make a difference in our kids' lives. So in 81, we had a meeting with some dissension among the organization about who was going to be the leadership in the future, and a group known with leadership from Alan Sherman, Billy Stearman, and Leonard Reef in California decided that they would like to take over and run the organization from the group that was running in New York. And they had the contacts and the best relationship with Maccabi World Union. So at that time, the group in New York backed down. They did not want to continue the obligation of running the games for Israel. And I went to the bathroom one day when we were having a meeting. I came back and Sherman said to me, "You'll be the president." He says, "But the good news is that I'm going to be the sports chair and take care of all the athletics for you." And I said, "Well, then what is my responsibility?" He said, "Well, you can organize the office. You can put together the relationships with the people that will be going as part of the Maccabi. And most important of all, you can raise the money to be able to fund the whole organization." So for the next 10 years, that's what we did. I was the president and probably was the best thing I ever backed into.
So Bob, over the years, people have always said to me, why Philadelphia? So you mentioned that the meetings were in New York. So when you guys took over, basically it was logical that you would have to have your home base as where the organization would be, right?
Well, because we were volunteers, we were young people in business at the time with obligations, both family and business relationships and such, and we didn't have the wherewithal to come to New York to do the meetings. And there weren't a lot of people in New York that were real active at the time. So we felt that we would move the offices to Philadelphia. We were able to get various locations that we weren't paying for at the beginning at time, and As it grew, we ended up needing office space, of course, but it just made a lot more sense running it out of Philly.
Thanks, Bob. So Toni, how about you? If I remember, I first met you sometime in 1985. Tell me how you got involved.
In 1981, a dear friend of mine who owned a dance studio had a son who was a fast runner, and he was a sprinter. Last name was Bloomberg, and they went to the games in 1981. And she came back enthralled and really wanted to bring a dance company to march in before the team. Some South American countries had dance companies. And she went to Bob, and after a couple of years of negotiation, we were told, you can bring this group, but you have to raise the money. Sandy and Jerry Bloomberg raised the money. We brought 18 dancers and 3 chaperones. I was the co-chairman of the cultural group. One of my daughters danced. We brought the other daughter, her friend, and my mother-in-law, and I was hooked. It blew my mind. I'm not a sports person. I'm married to a sports person. He played JV basketball. My father was a sports fan. He played softball. And what was I involved in? For me, it was about the cultural identity and the connection to Israel. And I said to Bob, if you want somebody, I'm not a fundraiser, but who was president of everything from my kindergarten class to 2 high school sororities and a college sorority, I'm your girl. And he took a chance on me, and that's how I got involved.
Thank you, Toni. And Ron, how about you?
Well, it's the mid-'80s. I said to Talia, Talia, things are good. Things are working out nicely. It's time for me to give back. And let's see, what am I interested in? I'm interested in the state of Israel. I'm interested in sports. I'm interested in young people. But I couldn't think of any organization except one that had all those attributes to it, except the Maccabi games. But I knew no one involved with the Maccabi. So it's about 1985, and we're at a party. About 100 people in the room, and it could be 100 people, it could be 50, it could be more than that in a room. And you could be in one side of the room, and your wife could be in the other side of the room. But if you hear your wife say to someone, "Don't move, I'll be right back, I have to get my husband," Talia came over to me, and she introduced me to a guy who was running the Pan Am Games for the USA in 1987 in Caracas, Venezuela. To make a long story short, I became the basketball chairman for the Pan Am Games in Caracas. And while I was there and enjoying myself, I had a very interesting conversation with a gentleman who, a resident, a native of Venezuela. And I was talking to him, and his name was Julio. And as we're talking, going back and forth, and he was involved with the organizing committee of the games, and I'm saying to myself, the only Julio I know is, I'm from New York, I know Julio Rodriguez, Julio Gonzalez, and his name was Julio Ginsburg. And I realized this is the kind of guy that I needed to as the hook. This is what brought me, and I realized that there were people from all over the world that had the same feelings about their Judaism, about the necessity for the state of Israel, and this is what brought me in and started my passion. And I was very fortunate to get further involved after that.
Thank you, Ron. So just to pivot a little bit, tell me a little bit about what were some of the defining moments or challenges that you faced during your tenure. We'll stay with you, Ron. You can go first this time.
Well, let's see. During the tenure, one of the accomplishments that I was extremely happy about was the fact that we were able to increase the size of the team significantly for the Maccabi. The last Maccabi, we had 1,132 participants with over 3,000 applicants. And that was a very, very important factor in making me feel good about what we were doing, and we were accomplishing our goals. I was also happy about the fact that over the 8 years that I was the president, that we increased our endowment by almost 3 times, with the help, of course, with the people like Stuart Weitzman and Brian Roberts and Sam Sporn. It's been, a wonderful organization with terrific people behind us. And in regards to the issues that we were involved in, Well, there's always issues when you're dealing with so many different people from all over the world and so many different conflicts of interest, perhaps. But we worked them all out because we were dealing with wonderful people. And I was very fortunate to make some good friends all over the world. And I see that one of them is on the call right now. Victor from Argentina, from Buenos Aires. How are you, Victor? Good to see you. And Victor Weitzman and all the guys from Chile, from Alvaro Rosenblut, just nice people from all over the world that we've been able to do business with, and we were very successful. And I see Roy Solomon from Montreal, but really Roy's from Brooklyn, and that really is what really counts about him. He's a Brooklyn boy, and it's always going to be with him. So in regards to that, Jeffrey, there's a lot of things that we're very proud of, but we can go.
I'm here, Ron. I'm here. Don't forget me.
Where are you? Oscar. I didn't see Oscar. You don't miss Oscar too often, that's for sure.
All right, thanks, Ron. How about you, Toni? During your 8 years, what were some of the defining moments and challenges?
I'm going to tell you about the challenges first. The first challenge was filling Bob's shoes. Bob was president for 20 years. He was already a living legend. And that was the first challenge. I went down to Philly with Wally with 96 questions on a legal pad. Remember that, Bob?
Yeah.
And he answered the 96 questions. When I became president, I found 96 more that I forgot to answer. The office was in Philly. I was in New York. Well, when Bob was president, he was present in the Philly office. That was a major challenge. We had no executive director for the first 3 months. We did a search. So for the first 3 months, I spent 46 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing things I never thought I would. I had to learn about an audit. I had to learn about health insurance for the staff, stuff that as vice president and first vice president, I never dealt with. But I think my biggest challenge was the fact that I'm a woman in a male-dominated organization. Lots of testosterone, not a lot of estrogen. And that was my biggest challenge. And although I had worked my way up, certainly, through the system, I still had to win the trust and the respect of my officers and the executive committee. And that was a major challenge. And one more, they had a lot of them, was dealing with the aftermath of the 2001 games. We all know that in 2001, there was the Intifada and the bombing of the Dolphinarium, and we basically sent Ron and Jordan Weinstein to Israel saying, let's postpone the games. Long story short, after a call with some ministers, Israeli cabinet ministers and Bronfman, we decided as an executive committee in a majority vote to send a team. And Ron and Bob and myself and Jordan spent the month of June virtually in Philadelphia trying to hold this together and put together a team. And we did it, and marching into that stadium, I know you're going to agree with me, Ron and Bob and everybody that was there, was the proudest moment, I think, in my Maccabi life. But we had to deal with the aftermath, which was some leaders who did not believe that we should go. And there were some rifts, and dealing with that successfully and bringing back really leaders who are leaders today to say, listen, we understand how you felt. This was the decision we made. Are you in or you're out? And most of them were in.
Thanks, Toni. So Bob, Ron and Toni were president for 8 years. You were president for 20 years. Certainly you have a lot of challenges and defining moments in your tenure. Tell us about it.
Well, the defining moment really was in 2001, because at that point, the Intifada was in its stage. We had a meeting in Philadelphia. People had all come in that weekend to pack the goods for the the kids, put it in boxes. We did our own packing and sent it to the kids before they went. It was 6 weeks before the games. And that Saturday night, before we had our meeting on Sunday, there was an announcement that there was a bombing, a suicide bombing at the pizzeria in town.
What happened?
We lost Bob's audio.
Yeah, his bandwidth was low, it said. Bob, okay. Bob, can you try to talk again? Bob, we can't hear you.
You're not able to hear me?
You're back.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, so I don't know how much you heard of it, but 2001 was a defining time because it was important that we support Israel at this most necessary time. Most organizations were canceling going to Israel throughout the summer and the early fall, and they felt abandoned. They said they would make provisions to be sure the athletes were as safe as possible. Nothing is guaranteed, but they would have programs in the evening so the athletes would be somewhat confined and so forth. And we made the decision to go, and it made all the difference in the world. The only thing I can tell you that I totally recall is that we walked into the stadium, and we were one of the last teams to walk in. Everybody was standing. Everybody in Jerusalem at that stadium, and that was the first time that
Can you hear me? Bob, we don't hear you.
Yep.
Can I expound on that a little bit also, Bob? We can't hear
Sure,
you.
go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, that 2001 was an incredible experience.
equipment.
I've said that it took those 3 weeks of putting it back together. We had all these athletes and the games were off and then the games were on. Putting it back together of 3 to 5 weeks took about 5 years off of my life based upon aggravation. There's no doubt about it. But if we hadn't done that, if we hadn't been as resourceful as we were and got all the other nations to come except one, every nation came back into the games except one. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't be on this phone call today. There wouldn't be any organization because that's how important the games were to the state of Israel at that time. And it would have been a terrible, terrible setback. Let me add one thing about Bob's 20 years. When Bob took over the organization in 1981, all right, it was an organization run out of a file cabinet. Really, basically run out of a file cabinet. It really wasn't an organization that was run on a professional level. And during those 20 years, Bob and his group, but primarily Bob, brought it to a much more professional level than it was back in the early 80s, late 70s. And that's how we were able to expand and do what we are able to do at this present time. And that credit has to be given to Bob under those circumstances for sure, because we wouldn't be where we are without that foundation. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks. So I have a question. We'll go to Toni first. What does receiving the Akhir Maccabi Award mean to you?
Wow. I think I was the third woman ever to get it. Personally, it was a recognition of the 35 years, or not quite 35 years at that time, that I put into Maccabi, Maccabi USA certainly, but Maccabi World Union on an international level. The award is only given to 12 people once every 4 years. And they asked me to speak for the group. I was the only woman, I think there were 10 or 11 of us. And it was a personal vindication in a way. When I started to go to Israel, when Sandy and I went the first time in 1985, we were sitting in the back. There were no seats for us at the official Maccabi USA tables with the flag and I remember, sitting at those meetings for 6 years and never saying a word, never open. This is hard for everybody to believe. I know that, but I never said a word because I knew that whatever question I would ask or whatever statement I would make, it would be looked upon as, oh, the girls, because we were known as the dancers or the girls. And I asked my questions privately to Billy Stearman and to Bob, and I got my answers. And when I started to speak at the meetings, I think that people kind of looked and said, wow, you know, she has a brain. So in a way, it was a vindication of, you know, yeah, you know, I'm a woman, but I can do this. It was an overwhelming feeling of pride. It was an overwhelming feeling of pride. Bob actually presented the award to me, and Ron had already won it. Bob had already won it. Yeah, it meant a great deal. I think that, you know, it was kind of the cherry on the cake of my Maccabi career.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you, Toni. Bob, how about you? How did it feel to get the Akhir Maccabi Award?
Well, I think it's just you're being recognized for what you do, and you know, we put all of us, every one of us that's made this organization, help grow it, are putting their own time and energy and many times financial resources into it. And it's nice to be sort of thanked. You're not going to get thanked along the way. You're going to get belittled for everything you do and criticized for every decision you make, and even as a volunteer, and that's just what goes. You can't have thin skin, and finally you're recognized for it. Someone has said to you, "Thank you for being it, and we're recognizing you for your efforts that you put into trying to do something and helping Israel and kids in sports." So it means a lot. It's very touching.
Thank you, Bob. And how about you, Ron?
Well, I was very thankful to be one of I think it was the fifth person in the history of the Akhir Award from North America to receive the award, behind Bob Spivak and Roy Solomon, who's attending this meeting. Yeah, I was very, very involved for so many years, and I really think that it was an acknowledgement of the effort that we put in, and I've always been very proud of receiving that award. Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot. So now we'll have another question here. I'm going to start with Bob. What do you see as the overall mission of our movement?
Well, I think it's pretty evident what we're doing. We want to enrich the lives of some kids. We want to give them experience. We want to take them to Israel. We want to give them an educational and cultural component that's been added in with the pre-camp, which is now Israel Connect. We want to have them have a unique experience other than just sports, and we want them hopefully their lives to be enriched because they've done this. So years from now, when they think back and look at this experience, they'll remember it fondly. Through their mind's eye, they'll see and picture something they did that was very unique, and we have really changed that around because it really was nothing but more than a sports organization. And all of us together have made it some very, very unique experience that most other organizations can't provide, and that's why we're unique in that respect. So I think that it's really about enriching the kids' lives.
Thanks, Bob. And how about you, Ron?
I undoubtedly am having problems with my equipment. Is that right?
We hear you, Bob.
We hear you. You're frozen, but we can hear you.
I'm having some problems with the equipment.
For me,
I'm sorry about that. Nothing I could do.
No, we can hear you. You're still coming through. Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
All right, Ron?
For me, it's what Bob says, but it's somewhat more than that for me. We are very involved as a Jewish organization through sports. We want these kids to have a lot of pride in who they are and where they're coming from. But we also have this affinity, this closeness with the state of Israel. And that's extremely important, especially nowadays, guys, more so now than in a long period, than in the last 50 years, that's for sure. The Zionism aspect of it is extremely important because we must let these kids know who's there for them, where they're coming from, and what the future is going, could possibly bring. So when we bring them to that Israel Connect program, we educate them. We hope we tell them the truth. What they learn during that program, they learn the truth. They learn what the story about Israel and how important it is to the world, to worldwide Jewry. And that's an extremely important factor for us because then they can come back, hopefully, learn something, and maybe be ambassadors on their campuses. And we all know what's going on campuses now. Maybe be ambassadors on their campuses and perhaps learn something that they can use for their future, for their own kids, for their families, and maybe come back and help our organization. I think that's a very, very important factor in really what we do. But we use sports as the hook. That's the exciting part about it. I've had, through my 8 years, through my 30 some odd years, I have had scores and scores of people, juniors, open athletes, masters athletes, come up to me and say, Ron, I just want to let you know that this has been the greatest experience in my life. Or they say a life-changing experience. And I'm talking about people in their 40s, 30s, 20s, and in their teens have said that to me. And that's been extremely important, very important. I'll never forget when Stuart Weitzman, and you all know who Stuart Weitzman is. He's been a terrific guy within our organization. He came up to me and said, Ron, this was the greatest experience in my life. He was at the 2009 and 2013 games. This was the greatest experience in my life. And I said to him, Stuart, you've got this worldwide organization. You've got this tremendous business going. This is the greatest experience in your life? And he looked at me and he said, absolutely the greatest experience in my life. Guys, that's what we do, and that's what we're about. And it's a terrific, terrific organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And Toni, how about you?
Okay, I have two things to say first. One, Ron was an athlete. Ron actually swam. Didn't you swim? Ron actually, they needed somebody to swim across 2 laps of a pool. I think
in Brazil.
In Brazil. Okay, so he was an athlete. And second of all, it is so great to see faces that I haven't seen in so long. My international wonderful people that, Victor and Alvaro, and I'm going to leave somebody out, and Oscar and Marcos, and who else did I leave out? And Roy, of course, and wonderful old faces. Okay. What do I think the overall mission is? We use sports as a vehicle and to connect Jewish athletes to their Jewish identity, their Jewish heritage, of course, pride, and connection to the state of Israel. The ultimate goal to me is Jewish continuity. When you take athletes of all ages to Israel and they actually see the wonders of this country, the incredible things this country has done, they have to come home with a sense of pride. And I've often said to the athletes that every one of you is going to be touched by something different. It might be putting a note in the Western Wall for grandma. It might be on top of Masada. It might be at Yad Vashem. It might be at a medal ceremony. But that feeling, those emotions will stay with you for the rest of your lives. And these young kids, I'm talking about open and juniors, who we take to Israel. One of these kids could be the next Salk or Sabin, the next Spielberg, the next ambassador, the next congressman, senator, and maybe even president. Obviously not everyone, but we hope that they come back with a feeling of pride in having represented the United States of America in an international competition, and with a real connection to the state of Israel. We are a Zionist organization, which just means we support the state of Israel, not politically. I don't love everything politically that's done in this country or in Israel. Nothing to do with that. We support the existence of the state of Israel. And that is what we're about.
Thank you, Toni. After that heavy one, let's go in a slightly different direction. The second sentence in our soon-to-be updated mission statement says, the volunteer organization seeks to enrich the lives of Jewish youth in the United States, Israel, and the diaspora through athletic, cultural, and educational programs. The new statement will probably say something athletes of all ages. And that leads us to the masters. So Art Linkletter used to say, kids are people too. Well, at Maccabi USA, we say masters are athletes too. So I'm going to ask you, what do you see the role of the masters playing in our overall mission? Toni, I'll start with you because you're still up there.
Okay. I think they play a very important role. The masters financially help fund the tens of millions of dollars we need to raise. I think as the years have progressed, we have included the masters more. We have made them feel more special, I suppose. They definitely have a role to play. Look, a lot of our leadership are former masters athletes. And when they are in a financial position or in a position where they've got the time to devote to Maccabi USA, they do so. And of course, they are, you know, financially, they are great supporters. So they definitely have a place. For me, I would say athletes of all ages is perfect. But if you have to prioritize, my priority would be open athletes, junior athletes, and masters athletes.
Thanks, Toni. Bob, how about you? The master's program, oh, Bob, can you unmute yourself, please? Bob? Okay. Well, while Bob is unmuting himself, we'll go to Ron, who's never muted. Ron, oh, here, Bob is back. Bob, tell us about your feeling about the role the masters play.
Well, I think they play a very important role too. As Toni says, yeah, part of it's financial, but the other part is their leadership. I mean, I find that a lot of our leadership in very many areas, when we were actually putting together an endowment program to perpetuate the ability to take the kids to Israel, it was done by master athletes. In many cases, the master athletes get involved in the projects themselves that are in Israel. So I think we're helping Israel through tourism, through financially, in many different ways by bringing them, and it certainly helps our organization to grow. And I don't think there's any doubt that they should be part of the leadership and continue to be.
Thank you. And Ron?
Well, we in the United States have been promoting the Masters Athlete Program for many years. And my sitting on the International Sports Committee for many years it was a very difficult thing for me. We understood in the USA how important the Masters Program was to the overall program for Maccabi World Union and the Maccabi. But unfortunately, there were a lot of other countries that did not see it that way. And I remember having some rather harsh experiences with some people saying that we wanted the Masters athletes because we needed their money. That part was true. And of course, we were bringing a team of 1,100 people at a cost of about $11-12 million. And the person who said that to me, who was on the committee, was bringing 14 people at a cost of about what, $600? I'm exaggerating, but I don't know the exact number for what I'm saying is, it was very difficult to convince the other countries around the world the importance of the Masters Program to the Maccabi. We're talking about different age groups for different sports. 35 plus for masters, for masters basketball players. Then we increased it to 45 plus, meaning for another group of people. But so the Team USA was able to bring for the last Maccabi at a cost of $12 million, 250 masters athletes. And the subsidized program within that $12 million came to about $1.8 million. And the master's program paid for at least half of that subsidized part of it, which we were able to use to bring the whole team. So that was something that has been very, very difficult throughout the years to convince the people around the world. But when the games would be played and the athletes would be participating from all over the world in those masters groups, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. In fact, the last Maccabi, very interesting. The last Maccabi, we decided, just for the heck of it, we were going to increase the Masters golf program to make another group of Masters golfers of 75 plus. So these older guys can get together and have a good time. So I'll never forget once, some gentleman was being interviewed on Israeli television, and he was a Masters golfer. And he kept on asking, the moderator kept on asking him, "How old are you, sir?" And this was in 2009. And he said, no, this was in 2013, excuse me. And he wouldn't answer the question. He would not answer the question. So finally, he got so annoyed at the interview, and he said, all right. I'm not going to tell you my age, but at the next Maccabi, I'll be 91. But my point being is the guy was, and everybody else who'd been involved in that program, it's been such an important part to Maccabi USA with such little effort needed by the organizers, did not interfere with any other programs within Maccabi, and just added so many great people to the organization. So that's, I think, and of course, what Bob and Toni talked about was the leadership that came out of that group. Just a wonderful bunch of people.
Thanks, Ron. So Bob, back to you. First of all, who came up with that tremendous catchphrase, 2 weeks to experience, a lifetime to remember?
It actually was, it was really not us. It was actually done before before 81. It was, at that time, it was 2 weeks to experience and a lifetime to remember was what they used as their theme song kind of a thing. And we just decided that it made a lot of sense. It wasn't 2 weeks anymore, but it was definitely a lifetime to remember. So we just incorporated in the things that we were doing. That's all.
So my question for you is, back then, we were the one-dimensional Jewish Olympics. What we did, it was unique, it was special, but it was one-dimensional. During your tenure, at the beginning, you decided to make this a multi-dimensional event, including some cultural and educational components. What was the impetus behind that?
Well, I think that when we decided that we wanted to take over the organization and run it, I'll call it the Sherman Group at this point, we decided that we were not just going to have some athlete come to Israel and compete for a few days and go home. In 77, when I was there, athletes would come in, play tennis for 2 or 3 days and go home. They didn't have to go. They weren't part of the opening. They weren't part of the closing. They weren't part of any kind of program. And we decided that we weren't going to raise money and do this and support the athlete to be able to go under those circumstances. We wanted to have what we called the Maccabi experience at this time. And that was when everybody agreed that we should have a cultural, educational component. And the only way to do it was in Israel. It was make it mandatory that you came for the whole program. And you got some culture and education into what you were doing in addition to the sports. It was that time we were able to add a lot of different programs to that, such as the Lev Lev and programs. And also that was during the period of time that we changed the logo and changed the name. So we had a different direction of what it was all about than the group that previously ran it up until the years of 1981, for sure.
And Jeffrey, just to add on to that for a second.
Excuse me?
If we hadn't done that, if we hadn't had the cultural aspect of the games, it would significantly depreciate our fundraising ability. You go to foundations, you go to people, they don't want to hear that you're going to be sending a basketball team or softball team, you're going to be playing ball in Israel. They don't care about that. They want to know more about what's going on, what are the kids coming back with, what are they learning? And that is an extremely, we're so much more than just sports. Sports, yes, is an important hook for what we do, and it's extremely exciting, and it's extremely important that we bring the best athletes and we do our tryouts fairly and that things work out very, very well. But we have to be so much more than just running around Israel in short pants. I mean, that's the way I look at it. So much more. We have to be giving them something. They have to come back with a feeling of something in their heart. And the vast, vast majority do. And that's as a result of the cultural aspect of it, which was the pre-camp, which was a 4-day program, which we increased it to a 6-day program with the Israel Connect.
Thanks. Toni, anything you'd like to add about Israel Connect during your tenure?
Yeah, we expanded it. Actually, we included a B'nai Mitzvah and Cy Atlas, and who was Cy and Ellen were the mission chairman in '89, and Cy asked me to be to do the B'nai Mitzvah chairmanship for the mission, and I did. And Steve Berliner's mother was one of the participants, which was just, she's a Holocaust survivor. I know Steve is on this, and I adore her to this day. So, yes, we certainly expanded not only the time frame, but what goes into it, and a B'nai Mitzvah service, so that we say to the athletes, if you've never been bar or bat mitzvah, sign up for this. We give you the prayers. We do some preliminary work. And if you have had a bar bat mitzvah, you can do it kind of as a reaffirmation. And the most amazing thing is that you may have 40 people sign up in advance and we get them little gifts, mezuzahs or stars or something. And we never have enough because the last minute during it was called pre-camp at the beginning, these athletes, I want to do it, I want to do it. And then the softball team has some kid who lived in the panhandle of Florida, who never had a bar mitzvah, who never wanted to come to Israel, but all of a sudden he feels, I want to have a bar mitzvah. So the entire team wants to come up with him. Now we're definitely 300 gifts short. But this was, I think this was a wonderful addition. The Lev Lev program, where we take athletes to facilities like the international, the ISCD, these internet for disabled kids.
Sports Center for the Disabled.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. I knew somebody would help me out there. And we take teams, whole teams, who go there. We bring little gifts and we do demonstrations. We've played wheelchair basketball where our athletes get into the wheelchairs with the kids. It is amazing, and it stays with you, and it's reaching out and doing something wonderful. And so I think that now that it's called Israel Connect, which is a great name, it's even better, and it gets better every time we do it. And to me, it is the heart of the program, and the sports surround it. But it is really, I'm not an athlete, obviously so. And to me, it's always been the cultural pieces of this program and the connection to Israel that's kept me involved all these years to this day. And it's something we really should be very proud of. And when we started pre-camp, there was no such thing. People didn't even know what pre-camp was. Well, the name wasn't exactly, expressive of what it was. But now there are not tons, maybe 10, 15 countries that do pre-camps, that actually do pre-camps in a smaller way, but based on what we've done, and Maccabi World Union has helped with that. So I think we should really be really proud of that. And Bob, yeah, you started in 1985 at the pre-camp at Rutgers.
Yeah.
Jeffrey,
You're welcome.
Jeffrey, can I just make it a little bit of an explanation to some of the people who are on this call who really don't know much about our organization? First of all, I think you should know that the Maccabi Games in Israel every 4 years is the world's third largest international sporting event. For the last Maccabi, we had almost 9,000 participants from 82 nations? I think it was 82 nations. So you just have to get an idea of the breadth of the program, the amount of work, the effort that goes in, both by the Israelis in organizing the program. Of course, they have to bring their own team, so they have a separate organizing committee. So you have awareness of the size and the effort that goes into putting this thing together. And it's been a worthwhile project throughout these years. I just want to put that in perspective.
Jeff, I want to add something that as well. We are a volunteer-driven organization, which means that a lot of the work and the responsibility are taken by volunteers. The chairman of the Maccabi, of the U.S. team for the Maccabi, is a volunteer, et cetera, et cetera. But we have an incredible staff. It's a small staff, 7 or 8 people in Philadelphia. And I will tell you that the best decision that I ever made in this organization before I was president and during my presidency was when we were looking for an executive director when I became president, okay? And we needed an executive director, and we hired Jed Margolis. Jed was executive director for 16 years. He worked with me for 8 and Ron for 8. And wonderful Beth, I call her my Beth. Jed and I developed a partnership, and this organization grew and expanded and dealt really well, I think, with all the volunteers and the parents and the athletes. And I just needed to say thank you to Jed because he virtually saved my life. But
and let me add to that I've said for many years, for my 8 years of being the president, that one of the luckiest breaks that I had is that I had Jed Margolis as my executive director also.
Jeff, can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
This is an old basketball player, a friend of Ron Carner, Steve Adelman, and I will forever and ever be grateful to him having set up the first Masters basketball team in 1989. And I mean, if you didn't feel the emotion, if you didn't feel what was going on at the time for a bunch of old jocks, then you were having trouble breathing.
Yeah, Stevie was 38 years old at the time. Okay, yeah.
But that was an experience. I was able to have my folks and my kids there. So that was special. The only thing that might have been more special was playing in 1965 and winning the gold medal with Tal Brody, who's been a friend for many years. And of course, I don't see Tal for 25 years, I'm sorry. And then I go over and play with the games that Ron had set up. And I'm playing against Tal. And it was just very emotional and very gratifying to have Dolph Shays there, the great Dolph Shays, and Ernie Grunfeld coaching us was really special. And I'll always be grateful to Ron to having set that up.
Thanks, Steve. So for all of our guests here tonight, usually we like to try to wrap this up in an hour, but that wouldn't be fair to this particular group. So for everyone that wants to stay, we're going to continue this. Don't think we're going to end in 11 minutes. We have questions to ask and obviously plenty of answers from these three. So what I'd like to do now is discuss the regional games. And let's go back in chronological order, start with Bob. Tell us about the importance of the regional games. I see we have some of our great friends from Clam are here today. Leo, I spoke with Leo today. It was his 60th birthday. And he goes, Buki, I would have been there in the middle of the night in Finland, but only for a Ranger game while I stay up this late. So Bob, tell us about the regional games and how they've grown and our involvement.
Well, I don't know of our participation before 1979 in the regional games, but Billy Stearman was the chairman of that particular project, and he asked me to join him as a chairman, and it was in Mexico. And from what I gather, we had participated once in the Pan American Games and probably taken maybe somewhere in the area 25 or 30 athletes. When we went in 79, we ended up taking 150 athletes. And it was the beginning of our developing a relationship with the diaspora that was really very, very unique. Because what we could do now was we could take athletes that weren't probably going to be able to be good enough to make the Maccabi team, but we could have that experience. And even from day one, we felt that there should be a cultural educational component added to those Pan American Games. Years later, we asked the European chairman to invite us to the European Games. Again, the level of athlete was quite different, but it gave kids a chance to have a very, very unique experience on a worldwide basis, competing against Jews from other countries and having a cultural and educational component again. So really now it's one of the highlights, I think, of our program. The next generation has taken it to some really wonderful levels that we didn't have before, but at least we began realizing the importance of taking these kids that would never really see Israel and never make Maccabi, but they would have some kind of experience that would be very similar, and hopefully in some ways it even enrich their lives.
Thanks, Bob. And Ron, how about you? I know you've told me over the years, Ron, that your involvement, particularly with Clam, was very close. You made so many friends there. It helped you with your election at the Maccabi World Union. Tell us about what you feel the importance of the regional games and the growth.
Well, let's explain first what Clam is. Clam is the Confederation of Latin American Maccabi, so everybody understands that. So let's get back to 2001 when it hit the fan with the Intifada, and there was just a terrible situation, but we put the games on. So the next games after 2001 were to be the games in Caracas, Venezuela in 2003, the Pan Am Games in Caracas, Venezuela. All right? 14 months prior to those games in 2003, there was obviously an upheaval within the political situation within Venezuela, and they had to cancel the games in Caracas. And 13 months prior to when the games were to be scheduled in Caracas, they were moved to Santiago, Chile. All right. I was the chairman of the team USA. And I knew that it was so important that after 1997, when we had the bridge tragedy, after 2001, when with the upheaval during the Intifada, that the next games, the next international games, were extremely, extremely important. So Team USA was committed to work with the Chileans during that 13 months and putting it together. And we put together a very, very successful program as a result of Lázaro Rosenberg, I'm not sure exact, Rosenthal, and Alvaro Rosenblut. They did a fantastic job in putting together games in 13 months, which is amazing to be able to do this. I remember I went 5, 6, 7 times down to Santiago, Chile prior to the games just to be able, we didn't have the internet at that time, or it wasn't as on everybody's desk. So we had a terrific program. So the Pan Am Games for Maccabi USA turned out to be an extremely, very, very important program. We increased our participation. The last games in Mexico City in July of 2019, and the games in Santiago, Chile in 2015, and the games in Brazil in 2011, we had 600 participants from Team USA. That is extremely important. It bound everybody together, and everybody realized how important that we were just more than just once every 4 years, that we were every 4 years, but 3 times and 4 times once a year in over a 4-year period in different games in different locations. Very, very important. And I want you to be aware that our camaraderie with our friends in South America has been an extremely important factor within our organization, both for Maccabi USA and Maccabi World Union, and for the Confederation of Latin American Maccabi. And thanks to those guys. And Victor Weissman is on this call from Buenos Aires, and he was one of the leaders in the program in bringing the Pan Am Games to the level to where they are. Yes, very important.
Thanks, Ron. Now, Toni, you told me that you and Wally have gone to how many regional games?
Everyone, except this last one in Mexico, because you want me to start to count everyone since 1987.
Okay, so tell us about your
Okay. I think Ron is right. I think that the personal relationships that we've established with the guys from Latin America, I mean, Ron and I kind of took a Spanish course, and when I went down to Argentina and realized that they speak a different kind of Spanish that I couldn't even understand, we conversed in Yiddish, which was interesting. But the friendships that we made and the trust that we established, mostly with the guys from Latin America, but also with the Europeans, really helped us to, in a very nice way, I hope you'll all agree with me, say to the organizers, to the host organizers, listen, there are standards that you have to live up to. What Ron said is right. In 2003 had to be a major success. There are standards, there are minimum standards that you need to live up to. These are the rules that you have to abide by. And by the way, the US is going to bring 300 people on the mission and 200 parents who just need badges to attend. What are you going to do about transportation? And initially they would go, what do you mean transportation? But you know what? We worked it out, and the games got better because of the camaraderie and the partnership that we had. I think the games in Chile the games in Mexico in '99, I chaired that were great. I think the games in Chile in 2003 were probably the best, the absolute phenomenally wonderful games. And the games and the recent games have really been great. Certainly Mexico and Brazil. The games in Europe are more of a challenge depending upon where they are, which city they're held in. But again, it's going in and to Berlin, where the games were in Berlin. and marching into the stadium, not the Giant Stadium, that was next door, where in 1936, you know, Hitler was, you know, we know the story, but it was unbelievably emotional. The opening ceremonies, you know, we were sitting at the city hall with giant Maccabi World Union banners and the stars of David all over the place. And here we are, we're sitting in Berlin. Wally didn't even want to go. I'm sorry, Wally, but you really didn't. But we went, and it was incredible. For me, 2003 was very special. I was president. I appointed Phyllis Magerman as the chairman for Chile. Phyllis is not a sports person. I said, don't worry, you'll get a great sports person. That was Ron. You'll delegate, it will be fine. And Phyllis was not well at the time. And marching in next to Phyllis was the second most emotional marching in. 2001 was the first, was really incredible. So these games also give us an opportunity to attract athletes who don't have the talent, they're not of the caliber to attend the Maccabi, but they sure can attend Pan Am. And it's not in Israel, but you still get this feeling of Maccabi being a worldwide Jewish family. And just from the faces here, I mean, you know, I love you guys. It's you being part of Maccabi has enriched my life beyond measure. And everything that I've done for Maccabi, both just by my time and my participation and financially, I have gotten back tenfold.
Thanks, Toni. So I want to stay with you. You mentioned earlier about the Maccabi movement was a man's world, lots of testosterone and the whole thing. And you and Sandy were called the girls. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen it change, both in Maccabi World Union and Maccabi USA over the years.
Well, Maccabi USA was an easier change. I mean, Bob had appointed Sandy Bloomberg to be on the executive committee. I think Sandy was the first female officer. I think she was president. She was secretary, sorry. Maccabi World Union was another story. We were known, Sandy and I, for 6 years as the girls, to the point that at one point, Bob and the guys got up to go out and have, whether they smoked at the time or to have Danish and coffee or whatever, and they left Sandy and I at the table. And Sandy and I are sitting, you know, we wouldn't let ourselves doze off, you know, we're sitting there like, you know, second grade good pupils, you know, and when it was over, the president, the chairman of Maccabi World Union at the time, went over to Bob and said, why did the whole US delegation leave? And Bob said, Sandy and Toni were there. And he said, they don't count. Okay, so that was the beginning. And Sandy and I obviously said nothing. But they told us, Bob told us, you know, what was said. It changed because times changed. It changed because you had people like Rivka Rabinovich, Israeli, like Jean Fuderan, like Lisa from Australia, me, and then later on Phyllis and Tanya Magerman, who became voices and were given the opportunity to take on responsibility. So now, is it still a male-dominated organization? Yeah, it is, but women are welcome. And I think that Maccabi World Union has really tried to bring women in, and on their own executive committee and their own secretariat, the small working committee, they have many, many women. Amir Peled just did that, which is great. I think too, part of the issue is that most of the sports, I think maybe 1/3 of the athletes from the US are female, maybe a little bit more, but I think I'm about right. And part of the issue is that we could send a female team in juniors and open and masters in any sport, even netball, which we don't even play here, but other countries don't. They don't have junior girls soccer. They don't have women's soccer in the Jewish communities. And that's something that we need to work on. So I think that it's changed. The world is changing. Maybe we're changing a little bit more slowly, but certainly, you know, we've got 3 vice presidents, right? Maccabi USA vice presidents. Unfortunately now, there is not one woman on the dais of Maccabi World Union. That, you know, that's kind of sad, but there will be.
Thanks, Bob.
May I add something, Jeff? May I add something
Yes,
to
of
what
course.
Toni just said? When Toni and Sandy, who were the only women that went to this very male-dominated meeting for sure,
We were
started to
very
speak.
popular, Bob.
I know, and you were very popular. And when they started to speak and represent Maccabi USA at these meetings, it changed the atmosphere a great deal. Other women were starting to come from other organizations. Eventually, a woman became president of Maccabi World Union itself. I think it led to the beginning of a lot of women's sports that were introduced in the plans. There's many more women's sports today that didn't exist in those days, like softball and the soccer and so forth. So it was a real change. It was the beginning of realizing that women were part of it, and many women have gone on, including Toni, to be international officers of Maccabi World Union. So that made a real difference in the organization for sure. You were a pioneer.
Yes, that's.
Thank you, Toni. Thanks, Bob. So, Ron, I want to ask you a question. You were part of the International Sports Committee from the outset. Tell us about what was done at that level to increase female participation in the movement.
Okay, back in the early '90s, for the 14th Maccabi, I was the overall sports chairman of Team USA, and when I looked at the roster of the sports that were available, I realized that women's participation was way lower than the men's, much lower. There wasn't any women's USA participation in women's field hockey. I don't believe we had a women's soccer program at that time. I don't remember back exactly when we instituted. But to make a long story short, it was certainly within my agenda to increase women's participation in the games. And we brought it up to about 1/3, maybe even 40%, Toni. I don't really know, for Team USA. And that was an extremely important factor. Now, within the International Sports Committee, we didn't have much of a problem that I recall trying to get women's sports involved. The issues for women's sports in South America was a cultural thing. Yes, the girls will be playing soccer, let's say, at an early age, but once they reach the age of 18, 19, they're no longer involved in those sports in most of the South American countries. That seems to be something that we had to deal with on a cultural level. Yes, we could do anything within the USA, but you have to have the participation, you have to have the competition. So that was always an issue. But I would say the International Sports Committee definitely wanted to increase the women's participation. They wanted to increase, in fact, what they did do, now that I think of it, they changed some of the criteria. You couldn't have a sport involved in the Maccabi Games if you only had, if you did not have 4 countries that were willing to participate. So in the women's sports, they brought it down to 3 countries in order to get those other nations involved, and that was extremely important and a very positive factor. And I would say that you know, whatever's available to bring women, that most nations are willing to do it. I'm hopeful that this will continue, and I see no reason why it shouldn't.
Thanks, Ron. So, Bob, I want to ask you, in 1981, do you remember approximately how big the size of our team was, the delegation?
You know what? I should have checked it. I would guess it was I would guess it was close to 400 or 500 athletes. Sherman
Right.
Might know if he's on the call.
He is on the
He will
call.
give you the exact number.
Hold up your hand, Alan. How many? 500? 500? Hold up your fingers.
So
300.
Hey, Leland here. We had about 200 in 1965.
wow,
Okay.
we've seen incredible growth. So, Bob, I'll start with you. the last two games, we've sent over a delegation of over 1,100. It's bigger than the U.S. Olympic team. And did you ever envision a time where we'd be sending a delegation that large? And I want to follow up after that with, we've had the argument of whether bigger is better or not. And that argument has been settled at Maccabi World Union when Akhir made it quite clear that we had the biggest games ever and it was run great in every aspect. So the question is, did you ever see that we would ever get this big? And we are getting bigger. And are you also a proponent of bigger is better? Bob?
Okay. I was not a proponent of bigger is better. I felt that by dividing the team and not being able to do in the very many events with them would be significant in the experience that they would have. And the logistics of doing things seemed to be out of whack in respect that we went over as a team on one airplane. Now we weren't able to do that. We were able to bond in a little different way. But I will tell you, I changed dramatically when I went to the games and was asked to speak at the Israel Connect program. And I stood up and looked out and saw what was close to 1,000 kids. And I said to myself, you know what? I've done this thing. I've loved this organization. And it was all about bringing kids to Israel. And hopefully that experience was enriching their lives. This is the way to go. So I am a now proponent that the more kids that we give this opportunity to, the more special we are as an organization.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you, Bob. How about you, Ron?
Well, you just can't use the phrase is bigger better. You need more definition of what you mean and what it entails. Yes, we want to bring as many people as we possibly can, and bigger is better only if it doesn't interfere with the preparation and the running of the games. And I could tell you in 2019, the largest Maccabi ever, all right, unbelievable amount of athletes from all over the world. What we had was a professional organization run by the Israelis, organized by the Israelis, and made the program very successful. So we were able to give more people, more athletes, the same experience and still in no way be negative or have a negative aspect of the running of the games. And that's extremely important. So when someone says bigger isn't better or bigger is better, it's not the proper statement. You got to go along with the next part of it, the games being affected by the too large a group. And as long as they can be done well and positively, I have no problem with increasing the size of the program.
Thanks, Ron. And Toni, before I get to you, thanks to Jed and Beth Margolis, who's confirmed that we had 363 members on Team USA in 1981. So you weren't too far off, Bob. So Toni, how about you?
I agree with what Ron said. When we march in, and I mean, it's been at Ramat Gan Stadium, it's been at Teddy Stadium, and marching in at the head of the delegation, which I had done a couple of times, several times, and looking back. Now, don't forget, I'm not 6'1", so looking back is kind of not so easy. But as you make the turn, around the field, and you see 700, 800, 1,000, 1,100 athletes dressed in the same red, white, and blue uniform, it's mind-blowing, and it kind of takes your breath away. And that snapshot says to me all the work, all the aggravation was right, was worth it, because this is what we want to do. You want to bring these athletes to Israel to give them 4 weeks to remember, a lifetime, 4 weeks to experience, a lifetime to remember. We want these athletes of all ages to come home with a feeling about being proud of being Jewish and a connection to Israel. And I said several times, I know some of you will remember this, that athletes come to Israel, the majority of them, they come to play sports. They're basketball players, they're lacrosse players, well, no lacrosse, they're soccer players, they're water polo players, they come to compete. So most of these athletes come to Israel as athletes who just happen to be Jewish. and they go home being proud Jewish athletes. And there's a real big difference in that. And that's what we do, and that's who we are. So yes, bigger is better as long as the host can design and execute a set of games with transportation that runs and food that's edible.
Well, thanks everyone. That's music to my ears, because my philosophy has always been that our success is not determined by how many medals we bring back to home, but rather by how many people we bring over to Israel. So it's good to see that all three of you are in agreement on that. Before we go to the last question, Seth Goldberg, one of our wheelchair basketball players, had a question. Steve, can you unmute Seth?
Yeah, hold on a second.
Thank you.
Seth, you should be good.
Yes, I'm here. No, it was not really a question. It was really a quick comment. First of all, I want to just take this opportunity. I thought this would be a nice thing for me to do, to thank Bob and Ron and also Toni. A lot of you guys I've met in 2017, which I played wheelchair basketball for. And one of the things that I noticed, I'm being a little touchy right now because hearing all these comments from Bob and Toni and Ron, Maccabi USA has, and I've told Jeff and Marshall this, along the other staff, Maccabi USA has changed my life dramatically in ways that people may not understand. Playing wheelchair sports, it's very hard to find a group to be very accepting of wheelchair sports and athletes with disabilities. And being part of this organization and seeing what Maccabi USA has done, have not just done for people without disabilities, but people with disabilities. And I think it kind of piggyback on what Ron and Bob and Toni has said is, yes, making bigger is better, but also by doing that is by including everybody. Inclusive, I believe, as I've always talked about, has been very important to me. And, you know, in 2017, this organization has changed my life. And I've said to myself that from now on, I want to be part of this organization for as long as I can and for as many years to come. And I know Bob and Ron and Toni and all the other staff members was a big kicker in the Maccabi Access program in 2019. And I just have to say from the bottom of my heart that I cannot thank you guys all enough for supporting not just athletes without disabilities, but with disabilities. And I'm proud to be part of this organization. And I am so, so proud and thankful to be part of this board too. And I hope that I can continue doing it. And I hope to continue being part of it in some way and somehow.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Answer Seth on the wheelchair, just to let him know that the organization and the USCSFI, United States Committee, we brought the wheelchair basketball team from Israel here twice to play in the late 70s and early 80s. We also brought the disabled team from Beit Akhir, the volleyball team here, 2 tours in the United States, including the Naval Academy, West Point, and at the West Coast. So we were into bringing wheelchair athletes to the United States long before you got involved. So there is history from the organization of being involved in Israel Sports Center and Beit Akhir.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Seth, for those kind words. And we're going to continue to try to grow the para sports as best as we can. And you know that we are very inclusive. We'll bring as many athletes as possible. So I think probably our last question of the night, as Jews, we're always reaching a crossroads, but we've reached a new type of a crossroads in our history right now. We're seeing more intermarriage than ever. Millennials are clearly moving away from religion. The greatest generation of Holocaust survivors is rapidly dwindling. And worst of all, anti-Semitism is exploding not only around the world, but in our country as well. So how do you view the importance of the Maccabi movement at this time? Toni, I'll start with you.
Okay. The Maccabi movement is the largest Jewish Zionist movement, a membership organization in the world with about 450,000 members in 80 countries. The organization works very closely with the ministries in Israel and Hasbara, which is, you know, a kind of, I think I don't think it's a ministry unto itself. They've developed with Maccabi World Union a program for working with especially college students to combat anti-Semitism. I think that this is something that we as Maccabi USA in the US can be part of. We don't have to write the text. It's there, but we can certainly be part of the program. You know, in the United States, for all the, you know, the political divides and the, you know, the tribalization, we are a country where Jews are relatively comfortable. We've thrived. Yes, there is, of course, there's anti-Semitism, but most of it, especially in New York, aren't faced with it. It isn't blatant. But there are countries, I mean, Venezuela, certainly, there are countries where Jews, where it's almost impossible to be a Jew. And I think that the Maccabi organizations in countries like Germany, right, like Hungary, like Spain and Portugal, these are small organizations, but there are Maccabi organizations in these countries. I think that Maccabi World Union is trying on an international level to really do a lot and to work with these countries in supporting them, in supporting, you know, their Judaism, in making them feel part of this worldwide Jewish community. I think we could probably do more. This is a tough time for everybody. And I'm not even talking about the virus. This is a very difficult period for Jews dealing with anti-Semitism. I think they do a really good job. And maybe what we could do is disseminate the information about what Maccabi World Union is doing.
Thanks, Toni. Ron?
It's a tough time. It's a tough question under the circumstances. There's no doubt about that. We have to continue what we're doing. We have to continue to educate these kids and adults on any level that we possibly can. They should know the truth, and that is the important factor. They should be able to defend themselves in regards to be able to answer the complaints or the accusations by those on campuses that are giving the Jewish kids a very tough time. They should be able to defend themselves in the streets in regards to those who are mocking the obvious Jewish people walking down those streets. Yes, it is a very important time. But Maccabi USA is much more than just a sports organization, and that's what we have to let other people know. We are there for the Jewish community. We are there for the state of Israel. And we just have to be out there and to be supporting those Jewish organizations that are out there on a daily basis, like Stand With Us, who we have incorporated within our Israel Connect program. Organizations like ZOA, who have been very, very outspoken in regards to really what the truth is out there. So we have to be able to support them to a certain extent, but I don't think we're going to be able to support them to the extent that we would like to, because I don't know if we have the breadth of it, the ability to express to people around the world how we feel, because we're just not that much involved on that level. Yes, during my presidency, I went to so many conference of presidents meetings. I went to maybe 40 of them over the 8 years, maybe 50 of them over the 8 years that I was involved, just so our presence of Maccabi USA could be identified by other Jewish organizations. But we have to be out there to support all those other Jewish organizations as well as ourselves, and maintain our program and maintain our sanity and our dignity and our common sense.
Thank you, Ron. And Bob, no better cleanup hitter than you. If Roy Solomon is Mr. Maccabi in Canada, you're Mr. Maccabi in the United States. Tell us your thoughts about this as well.
I'm sorry, Jeff?
Could you tell us how you feel our role, the Maccabi movement role in the current world?
I think we're quite an important, very important organization. We're as important as the other organizations that foster Jews being Jews and continuing to be strong in the Jewish community and get involved in the Jewish community and bring their children up with some kind of a Jewish culture at least. We're strong. We're as important as Hillel, or as important in my mind as Birthright and JNF and everything. And we actually have an advantage. We're getting the kids at a pretty young age, college age, high school age, and we really have an opportunity to, by taking them to these countries and showing them Jewish life and the growth of what we do. I think we're just an incredibly important and should be respected as much as an organization today.
Thank you, Bob. So before we wrap up, if anyone has any questions, now's the time. We have these three great leaders here all at once, and now's the time. If anyone has something they'd like to ask them, please, the mic is open. Okay. So with
Oscar,
that,
you there?
One question.
Yeah.
Actually, Tony and Bob can answer this too. I used to say to Ron, I don't know how you work. I don't know you have time to have a job. It seemed to me, and I know all you guys too, like he was pretty much like 22 hours every single day for as long as I knew him. Once it was over, how much do you miss like that role? And what do you feel, not what do you feel your time, but how much do you miss like just, you know, the action?
Okay, I'll answer that first since you mentioned me. I miss my friends. I miss being with a lot of my international friends. We had an endowment committee meeting the other day, and everybody was introducing themselves, and Jeffrey introduced himself as being the present president. And then I introduced myself as being the immediate past president, and I'm no longer the president, thank God, meaning that these are tough times. How am I keeping myself active? I've got a wife that is a well-known author. She's on Zoom 4 to 7 times a week, making presentations. I'm very active in my athletic life. I'm biking like crazy, which is the only thing that's keeping me sane during this pandemic. But Maccabi, unfortunately, is going through a difficult time. We don't know when the next Maccabi is going to be for sure. We don't even know if the Olympics are going to be held in 2021. And then if they're not held, will they be held the year after? Will they be held, will they not be held? Will the Maccabi be held? These are all tough questions. I think that the leadership of the Maccabi has a very, very tough road ahead. And getting back to Oscar for a second, where are you, Oscar? Oscar, would you put your mask back on, please? Thank you, Oscar.
Thanks, Ron.
Bob, I miss it incredibly.
Bob to Shifty.
Yeah, I miss the organization incredibly. I love the years that I was putting in. It was more fun than other things I was doing in my life, and became even more important in some ways than my business. I just was able to have a business that was giving me incredible support, not only financially, but in time and everything else. And I loved the fact that we got together 4 times a year. There was a tremendous bonding. I looked at Toni and Ron and you and Jeff and many others that are on this call, the Atlases and the Shermans, as family to me. And I was invited to their bar mitzvahs and their weddings and things that were happening. It was a wonderful experience. My wall here has all those memories. I see it every single day. There isn't a day that goes by, even if I wanted to, that I don't think about this organization. And I'm very proud of where it is today and how it has grown and the job that it's doing.
Thanks, Bob.
I'm sorry, I guess it's up to me. I think that when I knew that my second term as president was drawing to a close, and I kept asking myself, now what are you going to do? Because, you know, this was a very big part of my life. Yes, I have my red hot mamas who I adore, but that didn't take up a great deal of time. But I started to realize in the last 6 months of my presidency that I was starting to repeat myself, that all the really wonderful things that I said or you know, speeches that I made, I was running out of ideas, and I was kind of, you know, just kind of recirculating the things that I'd already said. So I knew it was time. Very luckily, when I became president and Bob said, I will do the fundraising for you, and Bob was part of that, you know, a part of my go-to team. He and Jed were my go-to team. The same thing happened with Ron, where I was included. I was, of course, on the executive committee as a past president. Actually, I was known as Madam X when I thought that was great, but now that, you know, we have, never mind. Maccabi was a very, very important part of my life. It still is. I'm on the chairman of 2 international committees in Israel. Not that that takes up a great deal of time, but I'm co-chairing the strategic plan for Maccabi USA at present. This is part of my life, guys. I mean, this is part of, it's become part of my DNA, and Bob and Ronnie and Jeff and the people who I grew up with in this organization. And I see Harry and Alan and Fred, and I'm not going to go anymore because I know I'm going to leave out people, and Lou, of course, but your present day. I'm talking about Lou Wortman. I'm talking about, you know, past people. You're all part of my life, and I'm obviously not as involved as I was, but you know, I mean, I have 5 drawers of Maccabi USA shirts. I'm going to be buried in one of them. So this organization, if you really are part of it and you buy into what we do and you believe in what we do and you see the results, the positive results of what we do, it's part of who you are, and you'll never walk away from it. And you'll never walk away from the friendships, from the you know, I mean, I could go to every country in South America, probably except Bolivia, and stay in someone's home if I wanted to, because I have a friend in every one of those countries. Same thing with Australia and many European countries. So God bless Maccabi USA for what it's given me, and I will give back as long as I'm able.
Thank you, Toni.
Thanks, Brian, for the question.
Thanks. Anyone else before we wrap it up have any questions? It's really nice to see everyone stayed on the line here.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Oscar.
Hi there. I can't go out without saying some words and a question for them. First of all, we are in front of 3 legends, not because of the ages, but because of what they did for our movement and for our people. I am in this movement since '81, and all the meetings and the planners and the Maccabi and the Pan Americans, this is my family. This 3 is my family, and almost all the people that is in this Zoom, and it's very emotional be participating about the Pan American Maccabian Games. For us to see the American delegation came in our country, you don't know how kavod, how emotion, how sensibility is for our young people to meet them. We tell that the Maccabi in Israel is our main event, is the best of the best because of our Israel, of our Zionism, and for our culture. But the Pan American Games is our social time to meet each other and to see the young people getting married too, you know? Then I want to ask the 3 of them, that is very difficult. In all these years, what is the moment, and I'm talking of Pan American because, of course, you know that we are here. Alvaro and Victor were president of CLAM. I was secretary of CLAM. The Confederation is very, very pleased to you that how you come to this game. The last one was more than 600 people, 650 people. It's amazing. It's amazing, you know. Having you in our countries is I don't know how to say in English, and there is no words. How is the highest moment, Toni, Bobby, and Ron, my great friend Haram? Ron, you don't seem like your age. You seem like a teenager, you know? How is
I
the
hope you're right,
highest
Oscar. I
moment
hope you're right.
in the Pan American Games all these years? Tell me one moment that you feel like wow. Can you tell us?
Well, I think it goes back to 2003. Knowing what we went through in order to be able to put those games back together after they fell apart, after the uprising in Caracas, in Venezuela, and the understanding that we had of the issues that were involved and the people that we needed to put it together, all cemented and all came out so beautiful. So I remember distinctly going through that process and being concerned very, very much that there would be a balagan, that there would be all kinds of problems involved, and seeing how well the games were run and how close the people became to each other. So I have to tell you, Oscar, my feeling about the Pan Am Games is very, very sensitive and very, very emotional. I don't think there is one specific moment other than giving your wife a kiss when I see her every time. There's one specific moment that I can think of that I found to be that emotional. But I hope everybody took that the proper way. And since my wife is in the room with me, I could say that it's covered.
Yeah.
Thank you, Oscar, for the question.
Big kiss to her.
Jeff, I don't think, yeah, I'm on now, okay? First of all, I want to congratulate you and anybody else who worked on this evening and staff, etc. It's been a great, great event.
One more.
I think for me, the basis and the strength of the Maccabi movement are the friendships that have been formed over all these years.
Oh.
And I'm happy and proud to say that Bob and Ron and Toni have been wonderful friends, as you have over many years. And this is what's been very special. I think it's what draws us back. It's what gives us strength during some very bad times. You know, we talk about the wonderful things that have happened tonight, but we don't have to go into detail, but we've also gone through some very stressful times. And the fact that we all were friends and we all stood together and we all had the same belief that this was one of the most important movements in the world, that's what kept us together. And as I look and I remember the friendships, and I remember Bob and I as co-chairs of North America for 10 years together, it brought Canada and the United States together, which it hadn't been there before. And that's something that we can be very proud of. And it's just been a very special part of my life and our lives. And I think back to when we were the youngest of the group coming to the meetings, and now we're the senior citizens. So as we look back, it's been a wonderful experience, and it's so nice to see young people coming up and taking over and doing a wonderful job. So thanks very much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Roy. Nice to see you as always. And before we wrap it up, tonight seems like a perfect night for anyone who wants to say something. We are
Jeff.
one big family. We're feeling it tonight. If anyone else
Jeff.
wants to